Hi, my name's Kamara and I am the lay chaplain at Catholic Sixth Form College in South London. I'm going to be talking today about my experiences being Black and British and Catholic. So I was raised in South East London and I went to a Catholic primary school and a Catholic secondary school. And the secondary school that I went to was a predominantly white secondary school, which meant that I would often find myself in groups or rooms where I was the only Black person or I was the only person of colour. And I remember sometimes in these situations things would be said or implied where I would just be left feeling uneasy. I remember one time in secondary school we were talking to a girl about how she'd managed to get such amazing grades. And I remember she looked at me and said, "No offence, Kamara, but I was just in a really white group." And I just remember feeling a knock to my confidence. Were Black people stupid or disruptive in some way? Another time, a girl had found out that I was mixed race, so I'm half English and half Ugandan. And she looked at me and said, "Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. I always wondered how you were so pretty. I thought you were just Black." And I just remember, I was reeling. It was one of those weird situations where you're like, does that person not understand that what they've said is offensive and hurtful? But it was also an interesting experience because I realised that my proximity to whiteness meant that in terms of my mixed raceness and my lighter skin, meant that I had certain advantages over people with darker skin. Like, would I have been uglier if my skin had been darker? I remember all through secondary school as well, and primary school, experiences with hair. So I used to have much longer hair than I have now. And I remember this one time walking into the canteen in primary school and I had my big afro, my beautiful natural hair, and everyone turned around and started laughing. Everyone was pointing and laughing, and I just remember feeling so hurt and small. And suddenly this thing that hadn't been an insecurity before was a massive insecurity of mine. And so in secondary school I'd wear my hair in a ponytail with a puff on top, and girls would throw pens into my hair and try and see how many pens they could get caught, and everyone would be laughing and I'd just be sitting there like a human dartboard, uncomfortable but not wanting to say anything because I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I remember a girl once saying that her dad had told her that if she brought a Black boy home, she would be disowned. And these kind of comments would just be said, like these fleeting comments in front of me, but just little knocks to my confidence and questions and new insecurities forming. I remember this one time in secondary school, a woman had come in and she was talking about her experiences in Uganda, so where my mum's from, and wanting us to raise money for a certain charity. And so our teachers went running around frantically trying to find Ugandan girls to participate in this assembly, and they gave us these monologues to read, written by these children who had had these horrible experiences and had been orphaned. And I'm sure this woman had the best intentions, but her entire assembly was about Black women being trafficked on the streets of Kampala, Black children with AIDS suffering and sadness. And I'd been to Uganda, but what I'd seen was the dignity and strength of the people and a beautiful culture to be celebrated. And I'd seen the legacy of incredible Ugandan saints, like the Masters of Uganda. But somehow this woman had created this two-dimensional characters where their only characteristics were that they were Black and suffering and in need of our help. And so there was this kind of us and them thing formed. And suddenly this culture that I was so proud of hadn't been celebrated. And I remember just leaving that assembly feeling so deflated that my culture hadn't been celebrated. And I think this happens so often where we only talk in our Catholic churches and schools and colleges about Black people when we're talking about charity and suffering and sadness. I think my experiences aren't unlike the experiences of many of my other black friends and peers, um, but many of my friends felt let down by their schools or their Catholic churches. Felt like the church wasn't walking alongside in their struggles and didn't listen maybe when issues were brought up. I remember at one of the first Catholic conferences I went to, and I had an amazing time at this Catholic conference, but I was, I think, maybe one of 2 or 3 other people of colour at the conference, and there were so many comments made where I felt so othered, so many comments about my skin and my hair, and it was mostly questions, it was mostly people interested, but I did feel othered. And I think we need, as a church, to make sure that we are being representative. I want to look around Catholic churches and see statues and saints venerated and stained glass windows with different races represented. You know, our Lord was a Middle Eastern man. Why is he always a white man when we see statues in our churches? We need to make a conscious effort to increase the diversity within the religious art that we have around our churches. I think I was talking to a student, so I mentioned I'm a chaplain, and she was asking me about Catholicism, and she was like, "Miss, isn't the Catholic Church just like old white men?" And I was just suddenly realising that she didn't feel that she belonged in the church because that hadn't been what she'd seen. She'd seen maybe other Christian denominations where diversity was embraced and people were accepted and represented. But in the Catholic Church, she hadn't seen that. And I think that's so common. I remember one of the churches that I went to in Southampton, so I went to uni at Southampton, and this priest made a real effort to represent the multiculturalism of his parish. So he had like banners all around his church showing different saints, Saint Josephine Bakhita, and just looking around and being like, I see this so rarely. I so rarely see other black faces on the walls and the religious art in my churches. I'm so rarely represented, and how can young people feel empowered and that they belong to the church when they never see their faces shown around in the religious people that we venerate? And I think this has to be done institutionally, because at the moment it's up to certain priests' own discretion to decide, okay, I want to make a conscious effort to increase the representation in my parish. But this needs to happen all around the country. The church needs to be somewhere where people can come and feel comfortable and their culture is celebrated. And we can't just mention black people when we're talking about charity. We need to celebrate black culture. And I think my faith really shapes this desire for change and helps me to recognise the necessity for change. If I think of myself as fearfully and wonderfully made and made in the image of and likeness of God, that each hair on my head is counted, how can I then hate my hair? How can I then feel that I'm stupid because of the colour of my skin or unattractive because of the colour of my skin? I think we need to make sure that we are a church of inclusivity. We're so privileged to have a multicultural and diverse and beautiful and big church full of so many different people of different races. But in this country, do we really represent that? Or do we allow other people to feel othered? And I think we need to listen. I think the first step comes from listening, and not listening to respond. I think it's so easy, I know I do this, to be listening just so you can find the weak points in someone's argument and, make your argument clear. But that's not the point. We need to listen without getting defensive. And if we listen to the struggles of black people, I think this has happened a lot to me when talking about these kind of things in Catholic circles, where people feel the need to make sure that I'm aware that other groups have also suffered. So if I say black people have suffered and are suffering, don't just say, but this group also suffered, and how come they're able to get over it, and how come we're not talking about that? Yes, of course, we talk about the suffering of everyone, but we really need to listen and make a change in terms of the suffering of black people. My mum always talks about her frustrations surrounding First Holy Communions and confirmations where she could never find cards that had, black faces on them, or rosary books that had black children. How you have the kids, like, confirmation cards, and maybe they've got a blonde white girl looking beautiful in her First Holy Communion dress, but it's so difficult to find those kind of cards for black children. And why is that when we have such a diverse church? I think it's because people haven't made a conscious effort before. And I always say this, that representation should feel like a conscious effort. You should feel like you're going out of your way to find images or to find resources, because these things aren't necessarily as easily accessible as they should be. And I think as well, we need to celebrate black culture within our churches, in the liturgies. How can we invite, gospel groups or different musicians or artists to come and create our churches in a way that is inclusive and diverse and celebrates the diversity of our church. I want to finish with a quote by Sister Thea Bowman, who was a Franciscan sister in America, and I think she sums up better than I am doing what I'm trying to say. What does it mean to be black and Catholic? It means that I come to my church fully functioning. I bring myself, my black self, and all that I am, all that I have, all that I'm worth, all I hope to become. I bring my whole history, my traditions, my experience, my culture, my song and dance and gesture and movement and teaching and preaching and healing and responsibility as a gift to the church. So let's be open to this gift. Let's open black people with open arms and listen to them, and walk in their struggles, but celebrate the culture and beauty and diversity of our church as well. Thank you.